Okay, boys and girls, back again for another round of the investigative journal on First Amendment Radio. Greg Anthony here. And yesterday, if you caught my show, if you didn't, go to it. And you'll learn a little bit about the political situation and really looking at it from a perspective that you don't hear on the mainstream or on most of the alternative stations because they just don't have the knowledge or the fortitude to tell the truth. Some don't have the knowledge, some have it and want to hide it from you. Kind of people like Sean Hannity, you've heard of him on the right, Rush Limbaugh, then you have on the left all those CNN anchors. They're paid quite handsomely, over millions of dollars, to keep from getting at the truth that we get at here. Told you a long time ago, the truth doesn't pay. Crime pays. Lying pays. In this world we live in. It's that simple. But you know what? I did end the show yesterday. I got a couple emails saying, Greg, why did you play Walter Veith? I thought you were going to get into the political Trump system and what's going on today in Washington. And I'm going to do that for you today. But I will play a little bit of Walter Veith because he does talk about, right where I left off yesterday, he was talking a lot about prophecy, which is kind of a backdrop for all of it, because these guys are in the pockets of the Jesuit and the Vatican Luciferian system, leading to a one-world government, a one-world order. And they can't get it without America being on the team. And that's what you're seeing going on. And all the other countries as well, working together to form this one-world government, one-world order that we're seeing play out right before our very eyes as our rights get dwindled away, get lost away. And you know, isn't it amazing though when you listen to what's going on in Washington and all you get on the news are these pitiful fights between the Democrats and the Republicans and all of this backstabbing and all this name calling and all of these things that really have nothing to do with what's really going on behind the scenes of the problems that are mounting worldwide, the problems that are mounting in America aren't being dealt with because they don't want to be dealt with. They have to have a cover. They have to have these people in the news talking about whether you are a liberal or whether you're a conservative, and you're constantly being barraged with all this nonsense. And so before, where I left off with Walter yesterday in the second half of my show was he gave you kind of a prophetic look at that, what the Bible had been saying about where this whole system is leading to and who is behind it. And he pinpointed it quite well. And just as the half hour ended, he began to talk about what he called the trump card. So I will get to that a little later, but I promised that I'd explain it from my perspective. And to do this, let's go back to, well, let's look at the Vietnam War. Now, many of you youngsters out there don't remember what was going on, but America was being torn apart similar to the way it is today, but the war was the vehicle for the Jesuits and the ruling class to split America in half and to tear it from its seams. And I don't believe it's ever recovered since. Going into the Vietnam War, we saw this communist scare that Ho Chi Minh from North Vietnam was teaming up with Red China and Russia. And at the time, the communist scare was prevalent in America. That's all you heard of as a kid. And so the premise behind the war was that we were going to stop communism in its tracks in Vietnam. But little did we know back then that we were funding and we were operating on both sides of the war. We didn't want that war to end. We didn't want to win that war. We were there to create chaos, to create this enemy, to begin to split apart America at the seams here with social unrest. You saw it with the anti-war movements. You saw it with the pro-war people during Vietnam. And all of this needless killing was going on without any intention that we were ever fighting a cause that was worthwhile. Now, what I mean by that, communism is something that was created back in the 1600s by the Jesuits in the Paraguay experiments. They called them the Paraguay reductions, and they were instrumental in creating this form of government. Why was it created? To create an enemy to the West, so that they could play this game of one side against the other to get their way. So what did Vietnam usher in? I say it never, we have in this country never recovered from it. And now we're seeing this social unrest unraveling in another way. And I'll get to that in a moment. So we have Vietnam being this powder keg, this war, unwinnable war, vets coming back going, why are we there? What are we fighting for? I don't give a damn. Next stop is Vietnam. Remember all the songs? If you were back growing up as I did in Vietnam during that time, you'd understand quite well what was going on. And behind it, so we have this creation of communism, our elitists understanding how this works, basically was funding the war. They knew that Ho Chi Minh in the North, the communist movement, was going to prevail as far back as Kennedy and Nixon, when the Pentagon Papers back then were released, showing that the secretaries of state and the defense and the presidents knew that the South Vietnamese government was in shambles, knew that the South Vietnamese army, ARVN, was incapable of dealing with the insurgency of the North, funded by, you're getting Western money, you're getting armament being given to the North Vietnamese by China, by Russia, and we understood it was a hopeless battle. We should have never been there to begin with. And Kennedy, one of the reasons he was killed is he did want to get us out of there as early as 1962, but they had to fight 10 more years for no reason, with all these deaths, with the motive to be using this fake communistic scare and this push telling Americans that we had to stop communism in its tracks in Vietnam, when in fact it was a creation of the very people controlling our government, that were behind controlling our government, controlling the rulers, the presidents that were selected to be put in office. And that's why when Vietnam kind of ended, but it never really did, the goal had been achieved by the elites, by the Vatican-led New World Order, and that was to rip apart America at the seams. I don't think you remember a lot of the little things that were going on back then. Now let me just remind you, we all remember, and you hear about the convention in Chicago, 1968, with the protests, and you see the pictures of the police pounding on anti-war protesters. But we forget about when the movement started with the Vietnam Vets Against the War. Now, how did those Vietnam vets ever get put together? Well, guess who was their leader? John Kerry. Remember his eloquent speech that was ripping apart our military and ripping apart our motives for being in Vietnam? Well, John Kerry was planted there. He was playing the Hegelian Dialectic. He was sitting there going, we have military men. Our military is slaughtering people over there. They're beheading people. They are basically killing innocents, acting like animals, which many soldiers that heard this were opposed to what he said and were very angered. But he did say some things that were honest to God true, and that was the battle for the body counts. That was the motive for Vietnam. That's how they decided they'd win the war. If we killed 200 North Vietnamese and we only lost 50, it was a victory. But the problem was, wars were never fought by body counts. They were fought by taking terrain, pushing the enemy out, and sustaining that movement. No, that didn't happen in Vietnam. They would go up, they'd name a hill. Remember Hill 472. They would take Hill 472, lose hundreds of men, and then would leave it, and then the North Vietnamese would come back. I mean, it was a ridiculous war. Kerry brought that out as well. But John Kerry turned out to be an elitist, the Secretary of State under, presidential candidate, Secretary of State under Obama. He was put in there. The anti-war movement was staged as well. And although many people were against the war, the Vietnam soldiers that came back were led by an insider, might as well say a co-intel, who shaped the strategy and who moved right in there to be nothing more than one of the Vaticanites and Vatican-led New World Order minion, John Kerry. So, we see right when the Vietnam veterans were protesting, they came right to the Capitol Hill steps, and I remember they put up a barbed wire wooden fence barrier to keep out the people that fought this war, to keep them out of the Capitol building. Isn't that amazing? So the police were instructed not to arrest any of the Vietnam anti-war veterans, and they were instructed to wait for the, in quote, crazies that were going to descend upon Washington. So they knew that the next volley of people coming in were going to be the agitators that were many being paid to create havoc in Washington, similar to what went on after the Trump inauguration. Remember? We have these groups now that move in wearing black, destroying cars, throwing rocks through windows. We've seen it at Berkeley. We've seen it in Washington, D.C. The same kind of disruption went on during the anti-Vietnam War protests. And after the veterans left Washington, in come the crazies, as many of the senators and congressmen termed them. And they said, now we'll get our arrests. And boy, if you look back at some of the video clips, they were doing the exact same thing. Bombing, starting fires, throwing rocks at the police, burning cars in Washington, D.C. The same civil strife was going on back then that you're going to see going on now for basically similar reasons, but different motives, right? So the Vietnam War was I'm looking at it from the viewpoint of how the elites manufactured this war, killed many, many people, South Vietnamese, North Vietnamese, and of course American citizens and soldiers, and many innocents. And it led to the disruption, I believe, of this country. From that point on, you didn't see any president that wasn't selected by the power elite, selected years in advance. And that goes on to this day. So, I got about 15 minutes here before, in the second half hour, I'm going to finish up with Walter Veith and the Trump card and his viewpoint of Trump, probably relating it a little bit to prophecy, but showing why he was put there. And when I say put there, he was put there. He was selected years in advance. Now I'm going to use kind of a cartoonish way of explaining it. But if you go back to some of the Simpsons shows, they will actually, 8 to 10 years prior to his coming down that elevator, running for the presidency, that exact same picture was shown to you in The Simpsons. Exactly, his hand movements, the same clothes he wore, the same people coming down that elevator, exactly the same. And that is their way of laughing in your face, telling you that we have selected Donald Trump already. Now people ask, when that first time he walked down that elevator, people asked me, who's going to win? And nobody thought Trump would win. He doesn't have a chance. And I said long before many, many people, Trump has already been selected. Don't worry about it. It'll work out for him. And that's exactly what happened. It didn't work out just for him, but it works out for the strategy of the Vatican-led New World Order, controlling our political movement, controlling the way people think, and controlling exactly what's going on in our political and social systems. And that's what happened. So what you saw when Trump was selected and finally took over the presidency, if you just look to his campaign, it showed to me, this is what showed to me that, wow, if anybody doesn't really understand the Hegelian dialectic, this is your perfect example. Because here they had brought in a guy that was brash, that was an outsider supposedly, although he's an insider. They don't tell you he's also a long-lost cousin of Hillary Clinton. They come from the same royal bloodlines. So they bring in a guy like Trump, who's already been groomed for this job. He's a billionaire, talks like he's a construction worker, and he uses language in the same terms. He's not afraid to not be politically correct. And he's really giving that impression that he's upsetting the apple cart. And now you have this huge fight starting. It started in the campaign, and it's gone on now for 3 years to keep the Americans, people, away from really the goal and what they're doing behind the scenes to take over this country and to put it into their new world system. And people are going to accept it and love it until you know what, it's the fan after it's all over. But Trump's playing his part quite well. And I always say at this point, these people are just actors, given a part to play. And Hillary Clinton was given her part to play. Trump was given his part to play. And they were diametrically opposed, right? You know Hillary Clinton's stance on many things. You know the family she came from. You know Bill Clinton and all of his escapades, what he stood for. And you knew she was coming from this area of corruption, this area of the Clintons and all of their crimes that have been covered up. Now, during the campaign, they were going to use this to distract the American people. And it worked to a T. And it also gave enough people the impetus to come out and support Trump in droves, because they were supposedly tired of the establishment, supposedly tired of the Clintons, tired of this corruption. And what did they get? They got a guy who said he's going to do it, but hasn't done a damn thing outside of talk about how great America's going to be. Oh yeah, the stock market is booming. He says jobs are getting great. I don't believe it is as great as he says. He says this is an economic boom. America's coming back. He's pouring money into the military. Huh? Yeah, he's rebuilding what Obama destroyed and what was been destroyed after the Vietnam War, putting together a ragtag military. I mean, can you believe that half our airplanes weren't even able to get off the ground? And Obama allowed this to happen. So now Trump's throwing in billions of dollars to get the military back in shape. Seems to be fighting against the whole world, right? Bringing America back to status. You know, we're not going to take shit from anybody anymore. We're not going to take shit from you when it comes to war, and we're not going to take shit from you when it comes to trade. And so Trump is out there beating the drum of America first. Trade wars. Let's start tariffs. We're going to be treated fairly. America's done giving away everything. And in a sense, it vibrates with a lot of American people. And I'm not even getting to the border immigration battles that are going on, which is another Hegelian dialectic being played out. So Trump is strong on the border. Let's keep the illegal aliens out. Creating this, what? A division between half of America's being torn apart over many different issues. Not to mention the Supreme Court justices that's going on in Washington today and all the arguments that are going on there. Nothing's getting done, and it is planned this way. Nothing substantial. Obamacare's still around. That should have been gone if the Republicans were in power. That's still around. You're going to see basically a stalling of everything till the Democrats get back in the Congress and get control of the Senate or the Congress, and then nothing ever will get done. It doesn't get done anyway, and the Republicans control the House, Senate, and the presidency. No. And let me tell you why. Because they've planned it this way. They've got Trump in there, rattling cages. Then we're going back and forth now with all of this supposed during his, work during his campaign to keep him from being president. But they all along knew he was going to win. They wanted him to win. But it was a game they're playing, the part they were playing. The actors were doing their job. So Clinton, during that period of time, was getting involved in all these scandals of her private server as a Secretary of State. She was using her own little email and server and computer system, sending state secrets all over the place. Not to mention Benghazi. Not to mention the Fast and Furious scandal. Remember that? All of these things going on where, as we moved past Clinton's loss, which was planned, we get into Trump's presidency. What happens? All of this stuff that Clinton did is being forgotten about for a reason. And they come up with this idea that Trump was colluding with the Russians to get elected, which is completely bogus. And that's how they're presenting it. But they create a special counsel that's been at this for almost a year and a half. Hasn't found any evidence of a crime. You're not even supposed to have a special counsel unless they're moving towards proving a crime. And in the meantime, the Justice Department that is supposedly under Trump is trying to prosecute Trump, and all of the people in the federal FBI that have been nabbed for allowing, trying to frame Trump for things he didn't do. This is planned, by the way. And at the same time, overlooking all of the blatant crimes that Clinton committed. And what is that doing to the American people? It is showing them there is no longer any fair justice in America, just like they want to show you. They want to show you that your country is no longer functioning. It's no longer working. And that's why everyone, whether you're on the Republican or Democratic side, are being set up for really what they want. And that is, your country no longer works. We have to create a new system. And you're seeing a lot of these new systems come out on the Democratic side. The socialistic Democrats now are proposing all of these things that to half America seem crazy. But again, by showing you at the highest levels every day in the news that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Justice Department is corrupt, and the crimes that should be adjudicated aren't being, and the ones that they're pushing to prove don't even amount to any crimes. And a lot of the people that are getting caught up in this are being used as scapegoats and are really being played again by this kind of system that they're working out. They're all planned. It's all planned. And listen, I'm running out of time this half hour, so I'm going to be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.